Don't complain, you can't hear it.
Very
So, welcome again to Bible study. Today we're going to talk about Ezra. I always have to say better than Ezra, which is a rock group, because I always think of that whenever I think of Ezra. Don't ask me why. I don't even like their music, but, you know, that's what I always think of whenever I think of.
Rock group now?
Yeah, better than Ezra.
That's the name of it.
Yeah.
Ezra.
Well,
Never.
Ezra.
I never
Right after Chronicles.
That's,
You got kids.
Look in the
Right.
index,
no,
Wally.
it's actually probably a band from the
That's what I
90s.
had to do.
Chronicles.
Oh, you're into your rockin' group.
Yeah.
I know the 60s and 70s.
I'm going to look here, just since we got Mr. Google.
Second.
Better than Ezra?
Second Chronicles.
Were they a one-hit wonder? Or
I
what?
grew up in.
I don't think so.
Nehemiah.
It's before Nehemiah, so you're right in the.
Let's see.
Yeah, but we're in chapter 1.
No,
so
so the group better than
Yeah, so-
American Avenue.
Yeah, so back in 1993, 1995, yeah.
And what was their hit?
there it is.
Um,
Yay.
I don't know if I've ever.
Good was their hit.
Well, you're in for a treat.
Oh, no, you're not. Not if you go to chapter 2.
Oh, the genealogy. Yeah.
1990.
That whole thing is genealogy.
Yeah.
40s.
Yep.
So do you want to go up there and do all the names, Jake?
No.
This one has one bad name.
It's only got one bad
But
name?
look at chapter 2, though.
Oh, yeah.
They made the
Well, we're doing
whole
it.
thing.
Yeah, we're not doing chapter 2. They
Chapter
skipped
because
it.
I didn't bother.
For good reason.
Before I used to look out the window.
It's just that one Persian road,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
kind of avoid that.
which is
So, all right, so,
Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel,
Babel?
Zerubbabel, Babel.
You say it whichever way you want. Say it with authority.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, nobody will know. the
That's
difference,
right.
So as we've sort of heard, I'm going to read a little bit out of my study Bible about Ezra. So Ezra and Nehemiah was one book in Hebrew until the 15th century. It's closely, related to the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which we've heard. Many scholars suggest that both Ezra and Nehemiah and 1st and 2nd Chronicles are theological, historical narratives from the priestly Levitical schools of thought in the time of the Second Temple. The author representing this school is sometimes referred to as the chronicler. Other recent scholarship suggests that Ezra Nehemiah has its own distinct author. The persons or group used sources, including first-person accounts, usually referred to as respectively the Ezra memoir and the Nehemiah memoir, letters in Aramaic as well as lists and narratives in Hebrew. The Ezra and Nehemiah book was probably completed by about 400 BCE. Its audience would have been Jews who returned from Babylon exile sometime or after 539 BCE. Exiles who came back to Jerusalem and the surrounding area were suddenly among those Jews who had never left the Holy Land. Those exiles also began setting themselves apart from the non-Jewish, especially Samaritan population. So the book of Ezra is sort of divided into two separate parts. Ezra 1 through 6 is God's people return from exile, so Cyprus decree from and the people's departure, the list of those who returned, which we will not be reading. The altar is rebuilt in Jerusalem, and the foundation for the temple is laid. Local residents oppose rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Building of the temple resumes with continued opposition from locals, and the decree of Darius, temple completed and worship restored in Jerusalem. Then Ezra 7 through 10 is the work of Ezra. The priest Ezra brings a second group of exiles to Jerusalem. A listing of exiles who returned and their arrival in Jerusalem. Marriage to people outside the faith threatens the restoration of the community, and drastic measures are taken to protect the faith of the ongoing community. So that's sort of a breakdown of what Ezra is, and sort of to get the idea of what's going on. So again, last week we talked about sort of the people being, having that hope of being released, the pathway made straight so that they can go back to Jerusalem from Babylon, or as I like to say, come back from South California, Southern California to Baldwin, Wisconsin. So that's sort of, yeah, exactly. So that's sort of where we're at. Do you have any questions about sort of the timeline here then?
So even at that time, the Samaritans were not well regarded.
No. They weren't. They were different.
And this
When-
was long before
Jesus.
the Good Samaritan and Jesus
Right.
story.
Yep. Yep. So, and then Gary's got some good stuff about that. There's a couple waves of people that come back, so it's not one wave at one time, but there's sort of waves. So we were saying that, what, 50,000 people, Gary?
So there were roughly 50,000 people that returned in 3 waves.
Yep.
And my Bible says that the first wave was only 1,754. Now, how would they know it was 1,754?
Well, just the same way they didn't know how many people
not
lived in
yet
town.
very large percentage of the 50,000.
Well, chapter 2 is the census of the people.
Yeah.
I think they did because they were checking on which clans,
Mhm.
and they needed priests, so they wanted to know who was descendants of Levi. So I think they did take a census.
And then my notes said that they had kind of a comfortable life in Persia.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was Babylon, then Persia defeated Babylon.
Correct.
And they became the empire. And then it was the Persian rulers who let the Jews return,
Correct.
right? Cyrus was one of them. And,
Yep.
Areas.
and then the second wave went with Ezra. And then the third wave went with Nehemiah.
And
Yep.
they all didn't come back.
Right.
And some chose not to come.
In fact, on Sunday in the one video, the guy says that Daniel stayed there. And I had never heard anything about Daniel after,
After the lion's den?
yeah.
Yeah.
But this guy claims that Daniel stayed there and may have established the school for the Magi
Okay.
that the 3 wise men came from.
There you go. There you go.
So at one time, the Jews were not regarded very highly by the Babylonians. They conquered them, they forced them to leave, right?
Correct.
And then it was Esther who restored the Jews to the good graces of the rulers,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
maybe?
Yeah.
That's when it started?
Well, I think so. The other thing too is as you look at these two different empires, Babylon was really much you follow what we tell you to do. That was the way they did their. So when they came in, whoever they conquered lost their gods, they lost their practices, they were assimilated into the Babylonian culture. Now Persia, on the other hand, takes a different approach. They thought that people were happiest when they got to do what their religious traditions were, and so they were just like, okay, you do what you want to do, as long as you don't piss us off, we're all fine.
And it didn't threaten the
Right? They didn't.
empire.
Right. As long as you didn't threaten the empire, you can do whatever you want. Go for it. And so you had a different sort of philosophy when it came to religious traditions and stuff. So like I said, you went from one empire that you will be assimilated, you'll believe exactly what we believe. And so you can see that in terms of like the stories of Esther, stories of Daniel. I can't remember all the 3 guys. Meshach.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
There we go. Same sort of stuff with that too, is because they didn't. So everybody's supposed to believe one thing, and the Babylonians taught them what to believe. While the Persians, on the other hand, were like, nope, you guys have your own belief system. You go do you, and like I said, as long as you just are happy and don't cause any trouble, we'll be fine. So.
Yeah, and then you think the Jews that did go back, they weren't exactly welcomed back to
No.
Jerusalem, because other people, the remnant had
Yeah.
whatever it stayed, or
Yeah, so you had a so that again, that's sort of, if you think of half the town of Baldwin leaving, being gone for 70 years, and then showing up after 70 years, there's going to be a little bit of conflict. People will have tried to move on, and
especially if
then
they told them they couldn't marry
right,
the local population,
right,
right?
yeah,
And they also, when they took people out of a country, they brought in
Yeah.
people from a different country.
yeah,
And that's how the Samaritans came to be.
mm-hmm,
A good example of that is after World War II. Germany got kicked out of a lot of land they had, and then the Poles forced the Germans out because they hated them so much.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so total populations were forced to leave.
Right. So you're having that. So you're having those dynamics coming back. So you have a remnant coming back to people that don't know them, who had to figure out how to play nice with the people that have moved there. And now you have another set of people coming on top of that who are like, "We're back," and they're like, "Who are you? What do you want?"
Verse 4 of chapter 1.
Yeah.
Just wait till we read that. How the people are going to take that.
So they
Exactly.
had some opposition of rebuilding the temple, right?
Yeah.
And Darius, who was one of the Persian rulers, said, no, they can do it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And
Go ahead.
he
Do
had
it.
the power, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, it's an interesting dynamic. It's when we think of them coming home, we're thinking, oh yeah, everything's going to be great. And you guys all know human beings; it never is that easy. There's always one. All right, so let's do chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 first.
In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with free will offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem.
Okay.
I mean, not only do they get to come back, but then they take things away from the local population.
So that
Welcome back.
yeah, it doesn't endear them. But also listen to how this flows. So if you would read Persian history, how would Persian history present these same events?
Well, the kings are wonderful. Yeah.
Right. But you won't hear this. So if you read Persian history of
You
this
wouldn't
event,
get this quote from Cyrus?
correct, you would not. So what you're getting here is what we talked about earlier. This is a theological historical narrative. So what the priests are doing is saying, this is how we see God interacting with the world. And so what they're doing is saying, they're giving King Cyrus, they're showing us that this is the reason why King Cyrus did what he did. So the Israelites are saying the reason why he did this is because God put this on his heart. This is God who God said he was. But if you read Persian history, they wouldn't say any of this at all. He just said this is what he did because this is just what he always does. He doesn't care if they're Israelites or Amorites or whatever they are. But there's nothing specific for that. But this is when we read a lot of these historical texts. A lot of these historical texts are capped in theology, meaning they're giving significance to. They're showing you how God is moving in the text.
Well, you would think that if he said this, that he would become Jewish too.
Right. And so it's but yeah, so just
So they're embellished.
well, embellishing is not is a little different. So what they're doing is they're assigning meaning to how they see world events. So it's sort of like saying, when we look at, let's say that you lost your dog and you think that God is caused that event to happen because you were sinful. So you're assigning meaning to what the events happen, even though that might not have been the case, but that's how you're perceiving the event.
And that's what they're doing.
And that's what they're doing. They're taking how they perceive the event. How are they looking at theologically? Because they're looking at it, well, God promised that we were going to come back home. And so this is the fulfillment of that promise. And so this is how we're going to say this. The promise was fulfilled because God did say, you're coming home. And so then now you have, okay, people have come home, and this is who brought them home. And so why so they're giving this earthly event sort of a theological meaning. So that's what they're doing with this part of the text. Because it fulfills their
Prophecy.
yeah, it fulfills their prophecy. And I mean, we sort of do that with ourselves too, you know. We sort of think, hey, I did a real good job not eating sweets for the whole holidays, so that must mean this is the reason I lost weight, because I didn't have any sweets. Even though you might have been running or lifting weights or been horribly sick or whatever the case may be. But I mean, you're assigning meaning to how you got from point A to point B, and that's what they're doing. They're taking a look at the story. They're assigning meaning from how they got from point A to point B. So,
Well, this isn't the gospel according to Cyrus.
correct.
This is the gospel according to Ezra,
Right.
who was supposedly the writer of this.
Correct.
So, yeah. I mean, we know that the Bible is not a historic, I mean, I'm probably going to get in trouble by saying this, but it's not necessarily a straight out history, I mean.
What's it got to do with us preparing for Christmas? That's the right.
What is
That's
this?
a great answer. I can't wait to hear your response, Louise, because I need a sermon this week, so you better have a good one for him. No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. There's actually I think there is a
Oh,
time.
it says right here, the rebuilding of the temple
Right.
Yeah.
is a significant event.
And I think, it's, we'll talk a little bit more about what we could do for that. So, but yeah, just when you read something in the Bible, I also want to see a lot of times when you read a history piece, it's theological. It's not just, here's the history piece, I walked to the store, but there's a meaning attached to it. There's a theological meaning. There's a faith type of meaning. God invited me to go to the store today, and guess what? I saw someone who needed food, and I was able to help them out. That's a theological looking at history. So the events still happen, but you create meaning around them based on how your relationship with God is. So, and we do that around all sorts of things too. I mean, how many times you say, well, that's a bad day today, or I was unlucky today, or so we do this with all types of things, not just with faith.
So doesn't that bring into question the reality of the Bible, or it's just a human concept of why this happened? It's not God inspired?
No.
No?
So it's still God inspired, because what they're looking at is they're looking at the events through the theological promise what God did. So God said, you're going to come back. And what happened? They came back. And so they're just saying that, okay, so God promised these things. It happened. So how do we explain it? Well, this is how we explain it. Well, God obviously had done something on the Persian emperor's heart for us to come back, because he could have been a real dork. He could have just did the same thing the Babylonians did. There could have been a different country that took over, Babylon, that was just as worse as Babylon. But no, we have, so God created the conditions for this to happen. So we get an emperor who comes in and goes, hey, you guys go do what you want. Oh, and by the way, rebuild your temple, because I think that's a good thing to do. I mean, in some sense, that is really pretty powerful, that you had somebody who wanted them to rebuild the temple, would help pay for them to rebuild the temple. And so they're assigning theological. So did the emperor say all these words? Probably not. But they're looking at it going, hey, this is what God did, And so it doesn't call into question the history of
Because the historical fact
Right.
is they did return and
Yeah.
the temple was built.
Right.
Now, all this other little detail,
Right,
it
it's
depends
up-
on who the audience was.
Well, it's up
you
for
know.
interpretation. I mean, because you never know. This could have happened exactly like what the Bible's saying as well too, but we weren't there. I mean, we weren't there with him asking him, okay, so what exactly do you mean when you do this? but it's their interpretation of the events. And we all do this. This is how history all works. The interpretation of any historical event, like any accident, has multiple ways of looking at it. You know, if you look at the way that the Revolutionary War, that was we think that's a great thing. You talk to the British, they think we're upstarts for it's the same event. It's the same historical significance. However, we as people put different emphasis on what that event looks like and means. So
We have our own perspective on it.
yeah, we have our own perspective.
I
Why did
find-
Winston Churchill write all these books about himself? Because he wanted to have history view him in a certain way,
Right.
right? You know, so he writes 4 volumes of books, 4 volumes of a book about his actions in leading up to World War II and in World War II.
Yeah.
I find the contrast between this return and the return from Egypt, you know, compare Cyrus with the Pharaoh.
Yeah.
One says, okay, you go ahead, and the other says, no,
Right.
you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, you have different, you know, so it's not to call into question that these events happened or that God isn't present in any of them. It's helping you see the perspective of how people looked at the event, how they framed it, how they looked at it and went, okay. Does that make more sense, sort of? And that's why I'm bringing it up, because I think it's important when we look at a historical event in the Bible, a lot of it's framed theological. It's very much a theological, how do people perceive that, how do they perceive God present in that event? And it's a little different way of looking at history than how we tend to look at history, though at the same time, I will say we do the same thing with history. Like I was just telling you, the Revolutionary War. There's 2 different sides to that, but we tend, as Americans, tend to focus on how the Americans did. You know, we care about, hey, we won, as opposed to the British who were like, yeah, you guys took all our stuff from us, you know, and took our land from us, and so we have a different perspective than them. And so that's all that this means, is what is the perspective of the people who are writing the text. And again, it's not saying that God wasn't present. It does. In a sense, it helps people understand more fully how God honored God's promise. God said, "You're going to leave," and they left. Well, how did that happen? Well, there was this guy who was a king who decided, you know, you could have any other kings take over Babylon, but you had this. Actually, God made sure that it was this guy who said, "Hey, we can rebuild our temple. Hey, we can go back to our land. We have a good person that did this for us." And so, you know, that's their perspective talking.
Well, I see it as, it shows God's sovereignty over history,
Yeah,
because he
Yep.
orchestrates what he needs to have happen
right.
to keep his promises.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's allowing you to see. Yeah, I think you put it really good, Don, in that God's sovereignty, that events happen, but let's frame them in a theological sense so you can see that it's just not. I think telling history through sort of that theological lens reminds you that this is not a coincidence. It's just not. There is intentionality behind history. So hopefully you're going to be able to read, as you read this text, that you're getting more intentionality behind it. That this just wasn't some random act. Some guy from Persia showed up, took over the Babylonians, and everything was fine. Just because the cosmic dice rolled a 3, you know, it was a plan in place that this has happened, and so you can see that as there's intentionality throughout history. So.
But the way it's written is a lot more powerful.
Oh yeah.
If he decreed this, that's a lot more power. So if you're a Jew and you're reading this and going like, whoa, God not only convinced him to let us go, but he also
Yeah.
had a written document, you know,
Yeah.
and then endorses God, basically, you know. So, I mean, it's a much more powerful message than saying, well, you know, King Cyrus had a good heart and he decided that they could leave, you know, and it all worked out, you know.
Exactly. But it shows God's intentionality throughout history. So hopefully that helps a little bit. It's not easy. Like I said, I think really makes you think about, okay, and that's one part of, as I've studied scripture, is that's why I give you context every week. Because it's so easy just to pull up the text and say, okay, well, this is what the text says, but what is happening at that time? What's going on that's making people, why is this a big deal? Like, why is this text, why are we saying this text around Christmas? Why is this a big deal? You know?
That was your question.
Because, yeah, and because I all know we've always read Ezra every December. Because, that's what I do.
Well, it's a Christmas gospel, right?
It's exactly. It's right in that. We all read Ezra. So
For pleasure.
yeah, just for fun. I don't know about you, but the Nehemiah. I was just doing that yesterday.
And then
We were all
Leviticus.
burning to know what
Exactly.
happened in Persia.
Yeah.
I think his nose is growing.
So I think it's important that we know the context of what's going on and who the audience was and sort of why these things are important. Why is reading Ezra important? Why is reading Leviticus important?
That's a bad one.
It is. It's a hard one. And so how do you but when you look at it the perspective that a country that has no rules needs to suddenly have rules, then it makes total sense. Still boring, but still it makes a lot more sense as to why we read stuff like that. So okay, let's jump to chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Now, I should just make sure, you guys just, in this chapter 3, 1 through 4, and then 10 through 13, there's no other reading with this, is there?
What?
The commentary they told me.
No,
Okay,
they don't have anything in parentheses.
okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything else, so.
No.
All right, so who wants to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 4?
Well, I'm ready to take on all these hard words.
Go, Randy, go. Go, Randy, go.
I practiced it ahead of time.
Instead of listening, you were.
I read it, she's been reading it and reading it. This morning, I read it one time, so I thought, oh my gosh, nobody's gonna wanna read this. Okay, when the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled as one man in Jerusalem. Then Joshua, son of Zadok, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel to sacrifice burnt offerings on it. In accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God, despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. Do you want me to read the other part too, or just that?
That's good. Or if you want to read 10 through
10 through
13.
13.
Yep.
Okay. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments, and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, and with cymbals took their places to praise the Lord, as described by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good, his love to Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord had been laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of the temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. So first they made the altar, and then they did the foundation?
Correct.
Because that was most important.
Correct. The altar was the most important piece. So,
Can you remind us who the Levites were?
aren't the guys that make the jeans Levi jeans?
The priest.
They were the priests, so they were the priestly class.
Okay.
So obviously, this is a Jingle Bells type of text.
Yeah.
Jingle bells? Oh, you're looking at.
So yeah, why in the world on
Reading
the
it now.
in Advent, why are we talking about this? This is obviously Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman type of text here. I don't know about you, but I felt all sorts of giddiness when I read this text.
So you were the people shouting, not the ones crying.
So why would they pick a text like this?
Because of the promise.
Because of the promise. Tell me more about the promise.
God promised the people would return. He kept his promise.
Yeah.
God promised a Savior would come to his people, and he did.
So this was the first step, I mean,
Well, it's just,
the rebuilding of
you
it.
can believe the promise of Jesus coming because he keeps all of his other promises.
I've got a thing called links to the New Testament. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
One of the key themes in the books of Samuel through Chronicles has been the royal line of David that would ultimately usher in the coming Messiah. Ezra continues this theme, showing that even though Israel's monarchy has ended, the royal line of David's descendants has not. Zerubbabel, the key figure in chapters 1 through 6, is part of this line. And the return of the Jews to Jerusalem prepares the way for the Messiah to be born in the land of promise, from Micah 5:2, rather than in the land of captivity. Oh, it had to happen in the Holy Land.
He's right there in the community.
I mean, you couldn't have this happening in Persia.
Correct.
It had to happen
Yeah.
in Jerusalem.
So I'm going to do something a little bit more sentimental, though, for probably the sermon on Sunday. So Christmas is a time of joy, right?
Not always though.
Not always, though. Christmas is a hard holiday, especially if you've lost a loved one. So when you have times where, you have people, so I think it's, people are like, well, how can people be joyful and sorrowful at the same time? Well, it can happen. This text reminds us of that. And in the midst of that, we still have God's promise, that God still walks with us, that God promises a Messiah, God still promises Jesus, and we can have mixed emotions around that. We can be sad. We can have tears. We can be joy-filled. And that's okay. We can do both.
But the people for the temple were crying because it was small and not as significant as before, not because of grief of people.
But grief of what was.
So they were remembering
house
what it
of the
was
Lord.
like.
Yeah.
They were remembering what it was like, and it didn't live up to their expectations. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was not as big as what it was, but you also have grief about, it's not the same.
And so the older individuals can still recall the magnificence of the original temple, and this projected temple will have none of the style of Solomon's.
So
Well,
just,
and they had to have been sad over all the years lost.
Yeah.
Without, they
Yeah.
looked at God as being in the temple.
Yeah.
And they didn't have that for 70 years.
yeah,
Well, nothing is the same. I mean, you go back to your childhood home with all your memories and.
nothing's the
Boy,
same.
that was a small house.
Different,
Yeah. Even though it seemed huge, it seemed like a mansion.
I thought we had a big vacant lot. No, it's kind of tiny.
But, so I would still say, though, that, people grieve. I mean, I'd say they're grieving. I mean, that as much as they're saying, well, it's not as magnificent as before, they're grieving that. They're grieving what it was like, just as we do when we grieve when we lose somebody. Or we've lost a job. Or, the family's not going to be the same anymore.
My dad's barn is being taken down.
Yeah. I mean,
It is.
Or you don't have family to get together with,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, all those things are grief that we have, and this is where the preacher takes a little bit of liberty, and I'll take a little bit of liberty with that. But I think a lot of us, that's okay. It's okay that we don't have to be singing for joy all the time on Christmas, because God doesn't require us to be happy all the time, And so that's and that's the reason I see that they picked this particular text is just to remind us that Christmas is not always joy-filled, that it can bring a lot of different emotions, and that's okay.
I thought maybe it was, about waiting still, because they
Yeah.
waited how long for this temple, and finally the foundation is being laid.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also very true as well, too. So if you want to preach that on Sunday,
No,
I'll be
that
happy.
was that
That came from Gene. Gene's
came from.
gonna preach.
Gene has to preach.
Yay, I can do that.
Because I asked her the same thing that Louise said. What does this have to do with Advent?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and again, too, you can look at it from the context of waiting. You can look at it as, under the context, again, we're waiting for the promise that God made, and God still honors God's promise. I mean, that's the big thing out of it. So, I mean, all those things are possible ways that you can look at the text. So,
But this is pointing out the Davidic line,
correct.
True.
Yep,
right?
yep, yep. Yep, gives us another way to look at God working through people. The way that Jesus' genealogy came about. So what else about the text?
Well, for his steadfast love endures forever.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they put toward Israel, but we use that in a surface of time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And again, that if you sort of look at, so the way that we see stuff is a little different because we see Israel as sort of the reason why God set Israel apart was for Israel to be that nation so that we can see what God does through that nation. And that, well, even through I would argue, again, that's my Lutheran lens, my Christian lens, is that you can point through here that the people of Israel are always sort of that model that the rest of the world was supposed to follow. That when we see God working through Israel, then we know that God is true and that God wants other people, just besides the people of Israel, to be followers of God. So that would be my bias and my lens of how I view Scripture from time to time. So that doesn't bug me when I see that for you is good, for his steadfast love endures forever.
Part of the liturgy.
So it can be, yeah.
Those words isn't that, we've heard that before, right? Is it just a scriptural, I mean, it's in this passage, but is it repeated someplace else? Or was it just part of our liturgy that we grew up with?
It's all over
Yeah.
in the Old Testament, that steadfast love of God.
Endures and.
Yep.
So going back to the good leaders and the bad leaders,
Mhm.
Cyrus and Pharaoh,
Mhm.
does anyone else have a hard time with thinking, why does God use bad people for his plan? I mean, it happens throughout the Old Testament. And, someone said to me that, voting for president, well, it doesn't really matter because God's plan is gonna be what it is. And if it's a bad leader, that's part of the way God is, and I'm like, but don't I have a civic
But my vote
responsibility?
counts.
Doesn't my vote count? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's gonna be what God wanted anyway.
I know. So, and that's the attitude of this person, kind of that, doesn't really matter. And I'm like, well, I don't know,
So maybe the better question to ask, do you want to live intentionally or reactionary?
Mhm.
So you can live intentionally with your life, so that the decisions you make are the decisions you make, and you'll see how God works through those decisions. So in some sense it makes a big difference then, because you're following what you believe to be right. You're living your life with that intention,
So, if you take Doris Day's song, Que sera, sera, what will be, will be?
Yeah.
That's a terrible idea. I mean, it's a cute little song, but
Right.
the message is,
But I think it still gets around
what
how
happened will happen.
well, yeah, but how do you live intentionally? I mean, because I think a lot of people. I was reading about this. I forget where I was reading about it, but so many people they live their life for 5 p.m. Then they live their life for Friday. Then they live their life for the next holiday. Then they live their life for the next year, but they don't live their life today. And I think doing that.
Well, that's all about purpose.
Yeah, it's
It's
all
all
about
about
purpose.
purpose, right?
Yeah, intention.
Why are we here?
Intention.
What's our
yeah.
purpose?
Yeah.
Like,
What's God's intention for us?
Yeah.
a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
If you get sick,
Yeah.
you're wrong.
Yeah. So, but I think a lot of times we wonder, well, does our actions matter? They do. They do matter. How do you live your life every day? Are you living for 5 o'clock? Are you living for Saturday or Friday night or Thursday night? Are you taking each day as what it is? It's a gift. Because we don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow. We make that assumption, but it's a bad assumption to make. So when you get done with your day today, have you done everything you wanted to do today? And if not, why not? What distracted you? Because you have a gift every day to live your life, which is pretty cool. But a lot of people don't want to live their lives. They'd just rather be distracted. So I'll invite you today. Did you get to do everything you wanted to do today? Or what distracted you from doing that?
I also would add, what's motivating you?
Yeah. What is motivating?
Why are you living the way you are?
Right. And if you want to take this text even further, how can you rebuild your life today? So many people think they're stuck in one direction. Well, I've always done this. Okay. They're rebuilding the temple. Why can't you rebuild your life? Is it going to be the same as before? No. There's going to be some joy. There's also going to be some pain with it. But you can rebuild your life today. People are like, well, I'll do it tomorrow. No, do it today. Because we're distracted. So that's, I think, the biggest thing in our world right now is all the distractions in our world. So, video games, Netflix, politics. There's a lot of distractions in our world. There's you can tell me, well, the part that I hopefully will never hear from you, and I never want to hear from myself, is, well, they made me do that. No one makes you do anything. You always have a choice. You can do what you need to do. It might not be fun, but I hope you live your life intentionally. I hope you don't live your life for 5 o'clock, or for Friday, or for Christmas, or for whatever marker you need to have until you're 65, or in my case.
Yeah, the majority of us here.
Or until I'm 80, or until I'm 90, or until I'm 100, Yes, it's good to have goals and stuff, but start living today. So what are you going to do today? What are you going to see different about today? Because today's a gift. So, all right. Well, what else about the text? Otherwise, I'll get us done a little early. I'm going to go back over and see how Janine's doing. So,
That's why I was late. I was over there and I just got lost in the time.
that's all right. That's all right. So I'm assuming she's doing okay so far. She's still about the same.
About the same.
Okay.
They doubled her shots that they gave her this morning.
Okay.
I was gonna stop in last night and one of the aides came out and another aide was in back and said, how is she today? And tears in her eyes. She's only 16, this girl. And she had tears and I just kept on going.
Yeah, she was doing pretty good last night. I stayed with her till about 9:30. I was waiting for Marilee to get back, and then yeah.
So Marilee is staying with her.
Yeah. So yeah, no, she did pretty good last night. She's got me puzzled though. She's warm. Most people at this stage are not warm, so she's got me puzzled. Yeah, I know. I don't care. I was like this. So, but no, she's very much at peace.
She is.
Yeah. So, I've seen a lot of peaceful people in the last couple weeks. So there'll be a third one this month. So it'll be Jean, Linda Paul's mom,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then Janine.
Plus there's several other ones.
Yeah.
Smalley Jensen that Anissa has cleaned for years, and
Yeah, I just read that.
she had cancer of the lung, and I don't think we even knew it. And there's lots of other ones too, Dr. Jacob.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Friday.
Oh, we were just talking about this. Her mother works at a funeral home
Mm-hmm.
at 94 going on
So
95.
does.
Yeah, she needs to earn money for her retirement.
Oh.
That's her standing joke.
She wants to build up a little nest egg, so when she does retire, you know.
Have something to go on.
But we were talking about the number of funerals.
Start traveling.
She doesn't say no when they ask her to work at a funeral.
Well,
So
and they pick up in December. I mean, they
Yeah.
definitely do.
They say that,
I
yeah.
can't be at my grandson's concert because I have a funeral. I can't.
Yeah, I know. So any other stuff about the text for today? Otherwise, how do you want to do? What do they have for text for next week? Because we're not going to do Advent 4. We're just-
Well,
Okay.
see, there's like
It's Luke,
four.
Luke, Luke.
There's
It's
two,
3 weeks
there's
of Luke.
two for December 24th and one for the 25th, so,
Oh.
There's
Okay.
two, because it says Matthew too.
Or
Luke
Matthew.
So
But-
there's 4 different ones.
the Advent, week 4 is actually Luke 1, 5 to 13, but it depends on what you wanna preach on.
Here, you can, right
I
there.
have it right here.
Oh, he's got
I think we should do
the,
Zachariah's song, because we know the other one.
Okay. You want to do Zachariah's song?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do
The
Zachariah's
first one.
song
I mean, we
next
know
week.
that one. Okay.
Okay, we'll do that for next week. Perfect.
Last night when I came home from choir,
Yeah.
I turned on the TV and, nothing on.
Chapter 1,
So I got to channel 7
verse 5 to 13,
PBS, and there was a
and then
concert.
57.
And
Mom and
I
Dad were
missed-
not.
I don't know.
No, I don't think it was. Well, I don't know.
Well, they were on.
The organist,
Where did mine go?
No,
I'll give all of mine.
well, I don't know. Anyway, this guy came in and was telling the story about a man from London that went to Israel and brought home children that the parents begged him to bring to London to save them before the Jewish Holocaust.
oh,
That was really interesting. But when I turned it on, the organist was playing all these keyboards and the pedals. Oh my gosh, I don't know how he kept on going. It was really good.
All right. Well, let me get this turned off and then.